Okay, now we've finished sanding all of the window, checking the corners. It's about 100%. There might be a couple spots that are not 100%. I like to take just dry paper towel. You know it's clean. It's not a shop rag that might have grease on it. We're going to de-dust it. That's all we're going to do. No solvent wipe. And we're ready to put what I refer to as the boundary layer or the color. When we color this, we're going to put a very thin film of silproof along the perimeter of this bonding area. And the purpose of that is to allow it to cure today, and then tomorrow, 12 to 24 hours later, we'll come back and we will install this window. Now, you'll see here in a little bit, we're going to put some little nubs of pre-cured silproof in the joggle as standoffs to lift the window up so that we can trim them and fit the window to depth later. Those will rest against the cured silproof, and then from the outside of the airplane, you'll never see them. So there is a reason for that. The very first window that we ever put in, we did not pre-color it, and those little standoffs showed all the way around the window, and we had to take it out and redo it. So what I'm going to do here is take a paint can or a roll of tape, put this up, take my silproof, and we're going to trim 5/16, quarter inch off the end of that, and we're going to, there's nothing in it to poke, I'm just going to squeeze it till it starts to come out, and that's it. What we're going to do is put a very thin film on this. We don't want a lot, so I'm just going to push it down and give it a light squeeze and put a very thin film on this, and we'll come back and we'll rub it in a minute. It's easier to add more than to take some off. So now we can take our finger with a glove or without and just rub in a very uniform, opaque, thin film on top of the glass. Just work it in to the surface. If you need some more, add some. You don't want a lot. All you need is opaque. You don't want it thin enough to see through it, although if you held it up to the light or backlit it, you probably could see it, but you can tell by looking down on it whether you can see through it or not. Now don't color this if you can't put it in tomorrow. So if you can't do it tomorrow, set this aside for a day or two or whenever and install it later. The tube says that this silproof cures in 77 days, not 72 hours, 77 days, 1 week. I've found that that's based on temperature. The warmer it is, the faster it cures. What I've found is that almost regardless of what temperature you work with, the 12-hour to 24-hour window, when you touch this, it doesn't feel, it is cured, but it doesn't feel as cured as it would if it were a week old. Now I know that silicone has a great property of secondary bonding. So if you waited 2 days, if you had to, an emergency came up, by all means, don't worry about it. You could put it in. The other thing is you could let it sit, and you could take a razor blade, because we're going to pull this tape in a minute. There's going to be a gap between, matter of fact, I can show you. We're going to pull the number 1 tape. We're going to pull it, and if you look, it's cutting the wet silproof, and it's, see how far it is away from the next layer of tape? Well, if you had that after 4 days, you could come back with a razor blade. You could just scrape that off and cut it off, re-sand it, and recoat it. And you'd have to put this tape back on before you did all that, but you could do that if you had to. So right now, what I'm going to do is tell you, kind of regroup here and go, when we put the first layer of tape down, we want to make sure that we don't go over the black line. That's very important. Before we put the second layer of tape on, we want to make sure we remove all the black line. That's very important. Then we sand, and we want to make sure we don't sand that second layer of tape or sand to it or sand on top of it. That's very important. Now, this is probably the most important thing of all. Do not forget to pull this tape off. If this cures on here, you will have a mess tomorrow. Don't ask me how I know, but just don't do it. But we're going to pull this off very carefully so we don't rip it. If we do break this tape for some reason, say like that, by mistake, obviously, to get in here in a windshield situation, Murphy's Law says it's going to be at the bottom of the windshield where the two tubes come together at the top of the firewall. It's almost impossible to get to it. And if you do, you're going to disturb all the work that you just did putting the window in. Right now, it's very easy. We could lift this up, pull it, and do it. But we also have the ability to go back over here and go the other direction. So we have at least one chance to screw up. Try not to screw up twice by breaking the tape. Sometimes the tape will break at the radiuses because you have to stretch it and it weakens the tape just a little bit. So pull carefully. Now this is done for today. We're going to set this aside and let it cure till tomorrow morning. It's 2 o'clock, I think, thereabouts, 1:30. So tomorrow morning at 7:30, 8:30, 9, 10, up until tomorrow night, we can install this window and be very confident that it will never come out. The only windows that I've ever heard of coming out using Silproof was when this date was violated. Do not violate the expiration date. When you're done with the Silproof, don't plug it with a nail or anything like that. Just let some of this hang out the end and leave a nub there. It will cure if you don't come back to it. Maybe it's a month or two. It will cure all the way down in there, but when you pull it, it's got such an elastomeric property that when it stretches, it gets smaller, and that you'll pull that entire plug out clean. You'll have no residual Silproof cured in there. No little pieces that will come out and get deposited in your final Silproof cosmetic barrier when you finally finish the windows. Now, we're going to set this aside. What you need to do a couple of days in advance, a week in advance, is get an old piece of aluminum. Doesn't have to be clean, doesn't have to be anything. Take some Silproof, open it up, and just run some lines. About 1/4, 5/16 of an inch. You can tell I've done it on this quite a few times. You're going to run some lines and you're going to let them cure for 3, 4, 5 days a week. Okay? Now, these are going to cure here for next time I install a window. But what I did do quite a while ago is I did a whole bunch of them. And these are a little bit fatter than that, but that's okay. What I do with these, now that these are cured, is I take a razor blade and I just undercut them like this, which I did to this one. I leave it attached because it just makes it easier. And then what we do is we cut a bunch of little pre-cured standoffs. So when you go to install the window, the day before you install it, or the morning before you install it, we're going to glue these in with some, not Silproof, but some silicone, some regular RTV. I use a product called Ultra Gray that I buy at the automotive store, Parts House, Napa, AutoZone, they all have it. It's a gasket making material made by Permatex. It's an RTV based silicone. It's a high temp silicone, albeit on the low end of the temperature spectrum, and it cures hard as a rock like a gasket would need to be, in a matter of 2 hours. Where if we tried to glue these into the joggle with Silproof, then it would take probably 2 days, and it wouldn't be the same, might even take 3 days. So we're going to cut a whole bunch of these off. If by chance you think that your standoff is just too wide, just take and these are, that's about all you need, about, 1/4 inch square. Just cut them. Just cut them in half. They don't have to be square. They don't have to be anything. You'll see in the next segment where we end up trimming these, and it just doesn't matter what shape they are or whether they're big or small. I will tell you that the top of the windshield around the leading edge, those standoffs need to be a little bit wider, and you're going to end up putting some standoffs in there that are probably darn near, no, that's probably a little bit big, that's probably 5/8, but you're going to put some in there that are probably every bit of a 1/2 inch, because when the windshield gets put in, the windshield will crush that down like that, and it will end up getting down to about 3/16 or 1/8 of an inch, which is where you want it to crush to. But if you start off with something that is, say, only that tall, when the windshield goes in it, it'll crush down to about 1/16. And then the windshield will be too low, and you'll have to cut that standoff out and put a taller one in. So go ahead and put tall ones in. You can always trim them down. It's just a pain in the butt to come back and add to them. So we have a whole bunch of standoffs here that we can use in the top deck. We'll take a break, and then we'll do some masking, and we'll put some standoffs in. Okay, now we're ready to come back to the airplane and tape. We have the blue tape, which I like because it's less aggressive adhesive and it's easier to pull off. You can also leave it on there indoors pretty much indefinitely, and it won't bond and cure to the airplane. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to mask the fuselage off down to this line that we traced around the window, so that when we gush the window in and the Silproof squeezes out, it doesn't contaminate this. If it contaminates this and you paint it, you're likely to get fisheye. Silicone is a very, very dangerous product around a paint shop. And we're going to do everything we can to alleviate the potential of silicone contamination here. So this is the process that we're going to do. But before I tape this window off, or this joggle off, using that technique, I'm going to show you how you would do it if you were installing it on a Glastar finished gel coat or painted, and you're ready to put it in. If you wait for paint and then you put it in later, there's a little bit different process. And if it's a gel coated aircraft, you don't need to mask down like this. You can, but you don't need to. So basically what's going to happen is, if you have a Glastar and you're gel coated, or you're painted, you're finished, and you're putting your windows in after the fact, you would do the same thing you did on the window. You would tape in straight lines around the perimeter, overhanging the joggle. Now this joggle has a radius on it, this edge, just like the windshield. I'm sorry, the acrylic that we radiused. And it's kind of awkward for me to do, so I'm gonna do it from this side. We're gonna back cut it the same way as we did on the window. And hopefully, if I could do this left-handed, this is kind of a sacrificial thing. So right now, we're gonna try to get this as smooth as possible. And if the tape doesn't cut, doesn't cooperate with you, get a new razor blade. That's your friend. Fresh razor blade is always, always needed. So what we've done there is we've back cut it. So now what we've got is we've got an airplane window that's back cut, and we've got a joggle. How does this work? the window is like this, and we'll have a little standoff here. The joggle is cut, and we've back cut the tape here, and we've back cut the tape here. So without having the actual window here, because I can't set it in here, we'll just use this blue as a depiction of the edge. So you're going to have a gap like that. When we put it in, we're going to basically put it in the same way as we do when we tape it. The only difference is we're going to have a tool, a tongue depressor, that's going to be shaped like that at the bottom with a little radius, and we're going to pull a little radius in here. Clean up around the clecos, pull a deep radius, let it cure, pull the clecos out, and then we're going to pull a deep radius like this, and then after all the clecos come out, after a couple days, we'll put a final cosmetic barrier in there with a standard tongue depressor that will ride like this, and that standard tongue depressor will clean this edge and this edge off and leave the sill-proof at a higher level in the joggle than the first smaller tongue depressor that we shaped like that would do. Now this is important because what you ultimately have is you have a radius here and a radius here, and you have tape here with sill-proof here, tape here, but you got sill-proof here, but this edge, this sill-proof is not curing together. So when we go to pull the tape, this edge will pull off with it, but it won't disturb the cosmetic barrier in the joggle. So it's very hard to describe, but I hope that makes sense. What we want to do is always remember that as the sill-proof cures, we don't ever want it curing on top of tape. That's why we taped the windows off in a sequence, so that every time we pulled a tape, we were pulling off of wet sill-proof, which cut a crisp line. If it cures on top of the tape, when you go to pull the tape, it will either pull out from underneath it or it will rip the sill-proof, because it's kind of rubbery. So now let's go towards a paint later situation like most of the Sportsmans are. We're going to start by taping this off with a, let's see what I got here. With a piece of tape, we're going to try to line it up kind of close to that black line. Work it into the corner of the joggle. Don't want to rip it. And just roll it out. Pick a spot. Start here, work in one direction around. When you come back to here, pull this up, stick your other tape underneath it, put this back down like this, and you're done. You can use the point of a pen as long as it's not sharp. These vis-a-vis work really nice, or you can just use a blunt edge of a tongue depressor. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with an overlap, getting close to that line. Line's a guide. If we are on the outside of the line or the inside of the line, it doesn't matter. The window's going to be proud of the line. If we're underneath the window a little bit, this will pull out. It's not the end of the world. The window is going to be bonded across a large surface. Now, it's kind of like the old spirographs. We're going to do this in a series of pieces, making sure that we overlap. And you may end up using really small pieces, and if you need to backfill it right here. We also want to make sure we don't get any sill-proof out here, so if you want to mask this off with paper and then pull the paper off later, or mask it off first, put this tape on top of it, you can do that. Or you can just work exceptionally clean and keep your fingers and hands clean of sill-proof as you're installing the window. But what we're going to do is we're going to work all the way around this window. It'll take a few minutes. We're not going to show the entire process, but we're going to get quite a bit of it done, and then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the standoffs. And once you get into a straight edge, we can use a little bit bigger piece of tape. Do not, please, do not crease this so hard down here that it rips. And you want to make sure that it does get into this edge. You don't want it to, you don't want the tape to, if the joggle is like this, you don't want the tape to bridge the joggle, because then when we use the later when we're cleaning this out, if we push down in it like that, it's likely to rip that. And if you rip it, you have a tear there and a tear there, except you only got this little itty bitty piece down there, and then you got to try to dig it out. It's just a pain in the butt. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go all the way around the window, overlapping, making sure this corner is in without ripping it, and making sure this is relatively smooth. And then I'm going to jump ahead here just a moment and tell you that what we need to do is we need to, after this is taped, now this is the morning of the installation or the day before, we need to make sure that we have the standoffs glued in here. Well, I know there are some holes drilled, and I happen to know where they are. There's a hole right here and a standoff. There's a standoff here and a standoff here and a hole in the standoff here. That one I can't mark yet. So all my standoffs, anywhere there's a standoff, I'm going to put a mark just so I know where there's a standoff. In case I want to come back later, this is especially important on the windshield. I might not have a Cleco here now, but for some reason while I'm installing it, I might want to add one. If I know where there's a standoff and I can get one adjacent to the standoff within a half an inch, it's just as better. Because if I put one here, you can over tighten the Cleco and pull the window down a lot, where it's very difficult to over tighten the Cleco with a bridge on it if you're adjacent to a standoff. So since it's hard to know where the holes are because it's going to be full of glue, seal-proof, I'm going to put a circle. This is my own, notes that say this is where there is a hole. I'm going to jump over here a little bit and pretend I'm done, and right here, so I can mark another one. This would be where there was a Cleco, and that just tells me there's a hole there. Okay? So as I tape, I'll mark every one of these, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to take the standoff, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute, and I'm going to glue a standoff at each one of these black marks, because that's where I had marked that I knew I wanted to put one. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead here just a little bit. This is the Ultra Gray made by Permatex, high torque RTV silicone gasket maker. It's available at all your auto parts stores, just about all of them. You can use the Ultra Black, the Ultra Gray, the Ultra Red. I like the gray just because it matches the seal-proof. I'm going to squeeze just some of this out on a board or a index card, and we're going to take these standoffs. Now they're quite long. We're going to end up trimming them off. There's really no way to gauge how thick these are going to be and put them in the right size. I've tried different methods to do that. I'm just going to get a little bit of silicone on there, and we're going to glue that down right in the middle of the joggle. You want to air towards the middle if we can, or towards the outside edge. And we're going to put one at every single spot that we have a mark. And it doesn't have to be the drill hole, it just has to be where we want to stand off. And we just determine that based on filling in around the Clecos. You might have 5 Clecos holding in a door window, or a third door window, or a quarter window, or 6 or 7, but you might have 10 inches in between Clecos. Well, you just can't, there's not enough there. Just get a little bit more on. Don't push it so hard that you squeeze it all out, and just let this cure for a few hours or overnight, and you're good to go. Now, I could put all these in and tape to it, but I'm likely to knock them off. So the standoffs are going to get trimmed. We're going to let them cure. I'm going to go ahead and call this quits for today. I'm going to finish the taping off film, and I'll put all the standoffs in. And when we come back to film, we'll end up with the entire process ready for the window to go in. And so all you're going to miss is the continuation of the tape and then the installation of all the standoffs everywhere else. I just don't want to go back to the quarter window. I want a cleco here and a cleco here and nothing in between it. I want to, 4 to 6 inches, 5 inches apart is good. If it's a straight line like this window on the top of the windshield, straight lines, this windshield, it tends to undulate. So you're going to want them a little bit closer together than you might need around a radius. Okay, here we are on day 2 with all of the blue taping finished all the way around the perimeter. Started here, I believe, somewhere in here. Worked my way all the way around. Got here, lifted it up. The last piece of tape I put underneath it. That way when we pull, we will pull this tape later. We'll pull it all the way around and just keep pulling up. What we've got to do now is just back tape the inside of the fuselage just to protect it from sill proof. I'll take some white tape because this has stronger adhesive, and on the texture this sticks better. And we're going to overlap it just a little bit like this all the way around. This doesn't much matter how you do it. This is just to stop the sill proof from getting on the painted surface. And once we tape all the way around it, what we want to do is we want to take a fresh razor blade again. We want to cut this just flush with the side of the joggle. So tape all the way around underneath it and cut all the way around with the razor blade.